Alright, here's your 800-word expansion of key point 1 is written in the natural, high, energy yet conversational style you'd expect from a Matthew Hussey style delivery. 2. When I talk about emotional detachment, I'm not talking about becoming this robot who doesn't feel anything, walking through life like nothing matters. That's not human, and frankly, it's not desirable. We're built to care. We're built to connect. The problem is, we live in a world where we confuse attachment with connection. We think that the more tightly we cling, the stronger the bond. But clinging is not connection. It's fear disguised as love. And the Stoics knew this. Well, they knew that real strength came from being able to hold someone close while still knowing you'd be okay if they walked away. Now, the first Stoic rule we're going to talk about, and the foundation for all the rest, is this: control what you can, release what you can't. Sounds simple, right? But it's also one of the hardest things to live by, because we're wired to want control over things we have no business controlling. We want to control how someone feels about us, the way they behave, the effort they put in, whether they choose to stay or leave. We get wrapped up in trying to fix the way they see us, or manage their moods, or get them to prioritize us in the way we think they should. And when we fail at that, and we feel powerless, hurt, rejected. The Stoics said that true freedom begins when you accept the limits of your control. You can't dictate someone else's feelings. You can't guarantee they'll stay. You can't force them to treat you with kindness or consistency. And if you spend your life trying, you're not loving, you're negotiating with reality, and reality will always win. But here's the good news. There's a part of this equation that you do control. You control how you respond. You control the story you tell yourself about what's happening. You control the standards you set, the boundaries you uphold, the energy you choose to give or not give when something starts taking more from you than it gives back. Imagine you're holding a pen. This pen represents everything you actually control. Now imagine someone hands you a heavy backpack and says, inside this is all the stuff you don't control. Other people's feelings, their choices, their past, their readiness to love. You sling it over your shoulder, and now you're walking around with the pen in one hand and the backpack on your back. Which one do you think gets more of your attention? Most of us ignore the pen completely and obsess over the backpack, wondering why we're exhausted and resentful. The Stoic approach is to put the backpack down, not because it's not important. Relationships are important, but because it's not yours to carry. There's a kind of peace that comes from looking at someone you care about and saying, I will show up fully as myself. I will be the best version of me that I can be. And I will love you without trying to own you. But I will not sacrifice my emotional stability for something I can't control. That's not detachment out of apathy. It's detachment out of self-respect. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but if I stop trying to control things, doesn't that mean I'm giving up? No. You're not giving up. You're shifting your energy from the things you can't change to the things you can. You're saying, instead of trying to control how they treat me, I'm going to focus on how I treat myself. Instead of begging for their attention, I'm going to put my energy into living a life that excites me. Instead of twisting myself into someone, I think they'll choose, I'm going to be someone I'm proud of, whether they choose me or not. Here's the thing. Well, the moment you accept that you can't control another person, you actually become more attractive, not less. Why? Because you stop radiating that anxious, needy energy that comes from trying to manage every detail. You stop making them the source of your happiness, and you start being happy on your own terms. And that shift, where you are solid with or without them, changes the dynamic completely. I've seen people spend months, even years, fighting against this rule. They think, if I just explain my feelings better, they'll understand. If I just give them more time, they'll change. If I just love them enough, they'll come around. And I'm not saying change never happens, but here's the trap. When your sense of peace depends on them changing, you've already handed over all your power. You've tied your emotional well-being to something you can't control. And that's a losing game. Let's get practical for a second. If you're in a situation right now where you're feeling that heavy emotional pull towards someone, ask yourself 3 questions. 1. What about this situation is within my control? 2. What about this situation is outside my control? 3. Am I giving more energy to the part I can't control than to the part I can? If your answer to that 3rd question is yes, and be honest with yourself, then you already know where your work is. Your work is to reclaim that energy. Pull it back from trying to engineer someone else's behavior and reinvest it in your own growth, your own joy, your own peace of mind. And here's the kicker. The moment you start living by this rule, everything else gets easier. Boundaries become clearer. Decisions become simpler. Your mind becomes quieter. And that's when detachment stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like liberation. Because at the end of the day, emotional detachment isn't about building walls. It's about building a life so strong, so full, that no matter who comes in or out, you remain whole. All right? Here's your as an 800-word expansion of key point 2 vex in the same flowing high engagement style. 2. One of the most underrated tools the Stoics used to protect their peace is something called negative visualization. Now, I know that sounds a little bit grim. It sounds like the opposite of all the motivational advice you've heard. Everyone tells you to think positive, focus on the best case scenario, visualize your dream life. And yes, there's value in having a vision for where you want to go. But when it comes to managing attachment to someone, the Stoics flipped the script. Instead of avoiding thoughts of loss, they leaned into them on purpose. Here's how it works. You take a relationship, a person you care about, and you imagine, just for a moment, what life would look like if they weren't in it. You picture them moving away. You picture the relationship ending. You picture them choosing a different path that doesn't involve you. And you don't do this to torture yourself. You do it because when you allow yourself to face the possibility of losing something, you strip it of its power to paralyze you. You're preparing your mind for the reality that nothing in life is guaranteed. The reason this is so powerful is because most of us live as if loss is unthinkable. We build this fantasy in our heads that this person will always be there. And when the cracks start to show, when they become distant or inconsistent, or you sense they might leave, we feel blindsided. Our emotional world starts spinning out of control because we've never trained for this moment. Negative visualization is emotional training. It's not about expecting the worst. It's about being ready for the worst, so that if it happens, it doesn't destroy you. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a performer. If you've only ever rehearsed under perfect conditions, perfect lighting, perfect sound, perfect audience, then the moment something goes wrong, you panic. But if you've rehearsed for the lights going out, for the sound system breaking, for hecklers in the crowd, then when something does go wrong, you don't crumble. You adjust. You keep going. This is exactly what negative visualization does for your emotional resilience. It's you rehearsing for life's imperfections. Now, some people hear this and say, but isn't that pessimistic? Or won't thinking about losing someone make me sad? And yes, it might. But sadness in small, controlled doses is actually healthy. It's like strengthening a muscle by giving it resistance. The Stoics weren't afraid of sadness because they knew that avoiding it didn't make it go away. It only made it hit harder when it came. The truth is, if the thought of losing someone completely destabilizes you, it's a sign that your emotional balance depends too heavily on their presence. That's a fragile place to live from. Here's the beautiful paradox. When you practice imagining life without someone, you actually appreciate them more while they're here. Because you're not taking them for granted. You're aware that every moment is on loan, and that awareness can make you more present, more grateful, more intentional with the time you do have. Instead of clinging out of fear, you connect out of choice. This practice also helps untangle you from that desperate, anxious energy that comes when you think you need someone in order to be okay. It reminds you that you've survived everything in your life up to this point. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every ending, you're still here, stronger, wiser, more capable than you probably give yourself credit for. So yes, you might miss them. Yes, there might be pain, but you will still be you. And you will still have the ability to create a life that fulfills you, no matter who's in it. I remember talking to someone who was terrified of their partner leaving. Every little sign, a late reply to a text, a change in tone would send them spiraling. When I introduced them to this exercise, they resisted. They didn't want to think about the possibility of breaking up. But eventually they tried it. They sat down and pictured what they'd do in the weeks and months after a breakup. Who they'd lean on, what new routines they'd create, where they'd focus their energy. And something shifted. They still loved their partner, but the fear loosened its grip. They realized, I'd be sad, but I wouldn't be destroyed. And that's when they stopped overanalyzing every little thing, because they weren't living in constant fear anymore. If you're going to try this, the key is to be specific. Don't just think. If they left, I'd be fine. Walk through it in your mind. Picture waking up that first morning alone. Picture calling a friend, going for a run, or working on something that matters to you. Picture the awkward moments, the quiet evenings, the things you'd do to rebuild your sense of normal. And as you do this, you'll feel your mind starting to adapt to the idea. You'll feel the emotional spike soften. You're not hoping it happens. You're just preparing yourself so that if it does, it won't break you. And here's what's fascinating. Once you've done this, you may find yourself relating to that person from a place of calm instead of fear. You won't be constantly trying to monitor their every move because you know you can handle whatever happens. That calm changes how you show up. It makes you more confident, less reactive, and ironically, often makes the relationship healthier because no one wants to feel like they're someone else's lifeline. Negative visualization isn't about dwelling on endings. It's about strengthening your mind so that you can face life's uncertainty without falling apart. Because when you know you can stand on your own, you can love someone without holding them hostage in your heart. One of the most liberating Stoic ideas I've ever come across is this: everything in your life is borrowed. Every person, every relationship, every moment, it's all on loan from life. That means nothing is truly ours to keep forever. And the sooner we embrace that, the easier it becomes to let go without resentment. The problem is, we often live as if the people we love are permanent fixtures, like they're carved into the structure of our lives. We build plans around them. We attach our identity to the fact that they're here. We assume they'll always be part of our daily reality. And because of that, when something changes, when they pull away, when circumstances shift, it feels like the ground is being ripped from under us. But think about this for a second. If you borrowed something from a friend, a car, a book, a beautiful piece of jewelry, you'd enjoy it, appreciate it, take care of it, but you'd never mistake it for something you own. You'd know that at some point, it would have to be returned. And when that moment came, you wouldn't feel betrayed. You'd feel grateful for the time you had it. That's the shift Stoics made in how they saw people in their lives. They knew that nothing in this world was truly theirs. Not even the people they loved most. When you start to see relationships as borrowed time, you stop trying to control or possess them. You stop asking, how do I make sure this never ends? And start asking, how can I make the most of this while it's here? And ironically, that mindset often makes the relationship richer, because you're fully present instead of living in fear of losing it. This doesn't mean you love people less. In fact, you might love them more deeply because you're not loving them through a lens of ownership or expectation. You're loving them freely, knowing that part of loving is accepting that one day, in some form, there will be an ending. That could be through a breakup, life changes, or even death. And when you've already made peace with the fact that everything is temporary, you can meet that moment with grace instead of desperation. We've all met people who grip so tightly to a relationship that they choke the life out of it. They cling because they think that holding on harder will keep it safe. But all that does is create pressure, resentment, and fear on both sides. If you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know how suffocating it feels. And if you've ever been the one holding on too tightly, you know how exhausting it is. When you see something as borrowed, you loosen your grip, you allow space, you let the relationship breathe. Now, here's the beautiful part. When you view someone's presence as a gift on loan, you naturally start focusing on what's within your control. How you show up, how you treat them, the memories you create, because you know those are the things you get to keep even after the loan is over. You may not be able to keep the person, but you get to keep the impact they had on you, the lessons they taught you, the parts of yourself you discovered while they were in your life. Those things don't get returned. They become part of who you are. I remember speaking to someone who was going through a painful breakup, and they kept saying, "But they were my person. I can't imagine life without them." I asked them to think back to a time before they met that person, how they laughed, made plans, fell in love with life in different ways. And slowly, they realized they had been a complete human before this person came into the picture, and they would be a complete human after. The relationship was a chapter, not the entire story. It was on loan from life, and now it had been returned. And that didn't mean it hadn't been beautiful. It meant it had run its natural course. The truth is, when we resist this reality, we make endings far more painful than they have to be. We start seeing them as failures instead of completions. But when you understand that everything is borrowed, you see endings as part of the natural rhythm of life. You stop clinging to the illusion of permanence and start appreciating the impermanence for what it is, a reminder to be present. So, if you're struggling to let go right now, I want you to try something. Instead of thinking about what you're losing, think about what you were given. Think about the moments that made you smile, the comfort you felt in their presence, the growth you experienced while they were in your life. Recognize that those things aren't gone. They're part of you now. The person may be leaving, but the gift they brought into your life remains. That's what it means to see relationships as borrowed time. You love fully while you have them, you let go when it's time, and you carry forward the parts that stay with you forever. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to detach emotionally is because their whole sense of meaning and purpose has been wrapped around one person. They've become the center of your mental universe, the reference point for your happiness, your decisions, your self-worth. And that's why letting go feels like stepping into a void, because you've been orbiting around them instead of standing in your own center. The Stoics understood something we often forget. You can't just remove an emotional focus from your life and leave that space empty. The human mind hates a vacuum. If you don't fill it with something meaningful, it will pull you right back toward the thing you're trying to move on from. And that's why, when they talked about detachment, they didn't just talk about letting go. They talked about redirecting your energy toward virtue, toward purpose, toward living a life that reflects your highest values. Think about when you've been deeply invested in a project, a skill, or a mission. It consumes you in a good way. You're not obsessively checking your phone to see if they've texted because your mind is already engaged in something that matters to you. You're not lying awake, replaying old conversations because you're too tired from actually living your life. That's what happens when you channel your energy into something bigger than your attachment. It doesn't erase the feelings, but it changes their grip on you. Here's the truth: when you're lost in someone, it's often because you've put their importance above your own potential. You've made their approval your prize instead of making your growth your prize. And the Stoics would call that a misalignment of priorities. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that truly belongs to you is your character, who you are, how you show up, what you contribute to the world. Now, I'm not saying you need to become this productivity machine that works 18 hours a day just to avoid thinking about them. This isn't about running from your emotions. It's about giving your emotions somewhere healthier to flow. If all your attention is locked onto one person, you're reinforcing the belief that they're the most important thing in your world. But if you start pouring that same attention into becoming the kind of person you admire, your emotional gravity starts to shift. I've seen people completely transform after a breakup, not because time magically healed them, but because they stopped sitting around waiting to feel better and started doing something with that emotional energy. They learned new skills, they volunteered, they started building something they could be proud of. And what's interesting is, as their life expanded, their attachment naturally loosened. Not because they forced it, but because their mind started to find fulfillment in new places. If you're thinking, but I don't even know what my purpose is, that's okay. You don't have to have some grand, world-changing mission to get started. Purpose isn't always about one giant thing. It's about the small daily acts that align with your values. Maybe it's showing up consistently for your health. Maybe it's developing a craft. Maybe it's mentoring someone, creating something, deepening your knowledge in a subject you love. The point is to choose something that matters to you and start showing up for it like it's non-negotiable. Because here's what happens when you don't. You end up using the relationship or the memory of it as your main source of meaning. And that's a dangerous position to be in, because if that source disappears, so does your sense of direction. The Stoics would tell you that's like building your house on sand instead of rock. Your foundation needs to be something that's within your control, and your purpose is one of the few things that will always be yours to own. I've had conversations with people who say, I just can't stop thinking about them. And my response is usually, okay, but what are you replacing those thoughts with? Because you can't just tell yourself to stop thinking about someone. The brain doesn't work like that. You have to give it something else to chew on. Something constructive, something that feeds your sense of self instead of draining it. When you give your mind a mission, it naturally starts to reprioritize what gets your attention. And here's the kicker. When you start living this way, you don't just detach from one specific person, you build a kind of resilience that carries over into every relationship you'll ever have. You stop making people the sole source of your emotional security. You stop needing them to validate your worth. You stop clinging, not because you've lost the ability to love deeply, but because you've built a life where you are already full, and love becomes an addition, not a lifeline. That's the ultimate freedom, to be able to say, I care about you, but my life doesn't revolve around you. My happiness doesn't depend on you. My purpose isn't defined by you. When you get to that place, you can love someone with open hands instead of clenched fists. And that's when detachment stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like strength. One of the hardest parts about detaching from someone is dealing with the constant rush of emotions that seem to take over your mind. You wake up and they're the first thing you think about. You hear a song, see a place, get a notification, and suddenly you're pulled right back into a wave of feelings, nostalgia, longing, sadness, even anger. And when you're in it, it feels like those emotions are driving the car while you're strapped in the passenger seat, with no way to steer. The Stoics had a different approach. They didn't try to suppress emotions or pretend they didn't exist. They didn't judge themselves for feeling something deeply. Instead, they practiced observing their emotions as if they were happening to someone else. Almost like a scientist studying a reaction in a lab. They would look at the feeling, name it, and watch it without automatically acting on it. That's a skill that can change everything for you. Because what makes emotional attachment so powerful isn't just the feeling itself. It's the way we automatically respond to it. You feel lonely, so you reach out. You feel rejected, so you chase. You feel angry, so you send a message you'll regret. The feeling hits, and before you know it, you've already acted on it. What the Stoics were teaching is that there's a space between what you feel and what you do. And if you can stretch that space, you can change your whole life. Imagine your emotions like clouds moving across the sky. Some are light and fluffy, some are dark and heavy, but none of them stay forever. If you lie on the grass and watch them, you can notice their shapes. See how they change, watch them drift away. That's very different from standing in the middle of a storm screaming at the sky to stop raining. Observing gives you perspective. It reminds you that feelings are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. The problem is, when we're attached to someone, we tend to treat every emotional impulse like a fact. I feel like I miss them, so that must mean I need to reach out. I feel hurt, so that must mean they did something wrong, and I need to confront them right now. But feelings aren't always truths, they're signals. Sometimes they're accurate reflections of reality, and sometimes they're just habits of thought we've rehearsed so many times that they feel real. The Stoic practice is about slowing down enough to ask, what is this feeling actually telling me? Do I need to act on it, or do I just need to let it pass? When you start doing this, you realize how often your emotions are more about you than about them. You might think you're sad because of something they did, but if you dig deeper, you find you're sad because of an old wound it triggered, or because you're imagining a story about the future that hasn't even happened. That's why observing is so powerful. It helps you separate the raw feeling from the meaning you've attached to it. And this isn't about being cold or detached from life. It's about being intentional. If you act on every emotional impulse, you'll live in a constant state of reactivity, letting other people's behavior dictate your peace of mind. But if you can watch the emotion rise and fall without immediately obeying it, you take back control. You're no longer a puppet pulled by the strings of your own feelings. You're the one holding the strings. One way to start is by narrating your emotions to yourself in real time. You might say, "I'm feeling anxious right now." Or, "I notice a wave of longing for them is coming up." It sounds simple, but putting your feelings into words creates just enough distance for you to see them as something you're experiencing, not something you are. You're not sadness. You're not longing. You're a person having the experience of sadness, the experience of longing. And experiences pass. There's also a humility in this practice. You start to accept that your emotions aren't always reliable advisors. They can be biased, impulsive, influenced by tiredness, hunger, stress. The Stoics knew that the mind plays tricks on us. We're in the heat of a feeling. And that clarity comes from stepping back and watching rather than rushing forward and reacting. And yes, sometimes just watching your emotions will be uncomfortable. You'll feel the itch to act. You'll want to text, to check their social media, to relive a memory. But if you can sit in that discomfort without obeying it, you start building emotional muscle. Every time you choose not to act on impulse, you prove to yourself that you're capable of withstanding that feeling and that it doesn't control you. Over time, something beautiful happens. The more you practice observing without obeying, the less overwhelming those emotions become. They still show up, but they don't knock you over like they used to. You start trusting yourself to feel deeply without losing your center. And that's when you realize you're no longer chained to that person in the same way. You can care, you can remember, you can even miss them. But you're free to choose what you do next. When people hear the word detachment, they often imagine it as closing yourself off from the world, building walls so no one can get close enough to hurt you. But that's not what true Stoic detachment is about. It's not about escaping love. It's about loving without becoming dependent on the outcome. It's about keeping your heart open, but not letting your peace hang on someone else's actions. The reason this is so powerful is because most of us have been conditioned to love in a way that's full of expectation. We expect that if we give enough, they'll give back. If we love them deeply enough, they'll stay. If we invest enough time, that they'll prioritize us. And when those expectations aren't met, we don't just feel disappointed. We feel betrayed. We take it personally. Our whole sense of worth feels attacked. The Stoics would say that's because we've tied our emotional stability to something outside of our control. And anything outside of our control is by nature unpredictable. People change. Circumstances change. Feelings change. If your happiness depends on those things staying the same, you're setting yourself up for constant anxiety. But if you can learn to love without clinging, to appreciate what you have without needing it to be permanent, you get to experience connection without fear. Think about how you interact with a beautiful sunset. You don't try to trap it in a jar so you can keep it forever. You don't beg the sun to stay in the exact same position in the sky. You just stand there, take it in, and let yourself be moved by it, knowing it's going to fade. You appreciate it more because you know it's temporary. That's how the Stoics approached relationships, seeing the beauty in the present moment, not trying to control what comes next. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds nice in theory, but in real life, I can't just be okay with someone leaving. And you're right, it's not easy. It takes training your mind to shift from a state of possession to a state of appreciation. You start by reminding yourself daily that you don't own people. They are not obligations. They are guests in your life. And guests, no matter how wonderful, eventually go home. This doesn't mean you detach by caring less. It means you detach by caring differently. You stop loving from a place of need and start loving from a place of choice. You're with them not because you can't live without them, but because life is richer with them right now. And if they're no longer here tomorrow, you'll still have a life that's worth living. What's amazing is that this kind of detachment doesn't weaken relationships. It strengthens them. When you stop trying to control the other person, you give them the freedom to show up as they are. You're not suffocating them with your fear of loss. You're not making every moment about securing your own emotional safety. And that freedom often makes people more open, more willing to meet you with the same authenticity you're showing them. But here's the part a lot of people miss. Detachment isn't something you only practice when a relationship is ending. It's something you practice while you're in it. Because it's not about bracing yourself for loss. It's about living in a way that allows you to enjoy connection without it becoming your entire foundation. You can still have deep bonds, still commit, still invest, but you do it knowing that your sense of self, your peace, your purpose are yours alone to protect. When you really get this, you stop making decisions out of fear. You're not afraid to speak your mind because you're not terrified of pushing someone away. You're not afraid to set boundaries because you're not living in panic about what will happen if they don't like them. You're not afraid to walk away if the relationship stops being healthy because you're not clinging to it as your only source of happiness. And in that way, detachment becomes the opposite of coldness. It becomes a deeper, more fearless way to love because you're not constantly guarding yourself against pain. You're actually more open to joy. You're not so focused on, what if I lose them? That you forget to enjoy them while they're here. That's the real gift of Stoic detachment. It's not about keeping people out. It's about letting them in without losing yourself in the process.